The air in courtroom 3B was stale, tasting of old paper, cheap disinfectant, and the quiet desperation of a Monday morning docket. It was a room designed to diminish the individual, with its high water-stained ceilings, heavy oak paneling, and the imperious bench that elevated Judge Alistair Finch a full 3 feet above everyone else. From this perch, he surveyed his domain, his expression a well-practiced mask of bored authority. His gaze settled on the man standing before him, a figure so profoundly unremarkable he seemed to be actively fading into the drab surroundings. The man's name, according to the file, was Michael Thorne. He was there for a series of unpaid parking tickets that had culminated in a bench warrant. A trivial matter, yet Judge Finch felt an immediate and inexplicable irritation. It was the man's jacket, a faded canvas thing that had seen too many seasons. It was his posture, ramrod straight, but without aggression, a stillness that seemed out of place. Most of all, it was the small, colorful bar of ribbons, pinned crookedly to his lapel. They looked like cheap imitations, the kind of thing a man might buy at a surplus store to feel important. Finch leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension that echoed slightly in the hushed room. "Mr. Thorne, is it? You seem to have a problem with authority. Judging by these citations, a problem with following simple rules. And yet," he gestured with a gold pen, "you come into my courtroom wearing unearned military decorations, a rather bold choice." Michael Thorne didn't flinch. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue that seemed to hold the memory of vast empty horizons, remained fixed on a point just above the judge's head. His hands were clasped loosely behind his back, his knuckles scarred and prominent. He was a man in his late 40s, with lines etched around his eyes and mouth that weren't from smiling. His hair was cut short, more gray than brown, and a thin white scar cut through his left eyebrow. He looked tired, not just from a lack of sleep, but with a weariness that seemed to have settled deep into his bones. The public defender, a young overwhelmed woman named Sarah, cleared her throat. "Your Honor, my client meant no disrespect. He is a veteran, and those are his service ribbons." Judge Finch let out a short, derisive laugh. "A veteran? Miss Jenkins, I've seen veterans. They carry themselves with a certain pride. They are neat. They are respectful of the institutions they fought to protect. This man," he waved his pen again at Thorne, "looks like he just rolled out of a ditch. And those medals, the Navy Cross, several bronze stars, a Purple Heart. That's quite the collection for a man who can't manage to pay a parking ticket. I suspect they are as fraudulent as his respect for this court." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Stolen valor. It was a serious charge, a deep insult. Thorne's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a tiny flicker of a muscle beneath the weathered skin. He said nothing. His silence was a vacuum, and the judge, a man who abhorred a vacuum, rushed to fill it with more of his own importance. "Well, Mr. Thorne, are you going to stand there mute, or are you going to explain to this court why you're masquerading as a hero?" From the third row of the gallery, a young lawyer named David Chun watched the exchange with a growing sense of unease. He was waiting for his own client's case to be called, but he was completely captivated by the drama unfolding at the defendant's table. Unlike the judge, David saw something else in Michael Thorne. David had served 4 years in the Marine Corps as a JAG officer before entering private practice. He had spent his time around warriors, men who had been to the darkest corners of the world, and returned with ghosts in their eyes. He recognized the look. He saw the way Thorne stood, perfectly balanced on the balls of his feet, a posture that was both relaxed and ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. He saw the constant subtle scan of his eyes, not just looking at the judge, but cataloging the exits, the position of the bailiff, the layout of the room. It was the ingrained hypervigilance of a man for whom every environment was a potential threat matrix. The judge continued his tirade, his voice rising in theatrical indignation. People sacrifice for those medals, Mr. Thorne. They bleed for them. Men die for them. For you to wear them as some sort of costume is an affront to every man and woman who has ever worn the uniform of this country. It is a desecration. The prosecutor, a slick man in a suit that cost more than Thorne's car, smirked. The public defender looked down at her notes, her face flushed with embarrassment for her client. But Thorne himself remained a statue of quiet endurance. His breathing was slow and even, a measured cadence David Chen recognized as combat breathing, a technique used to control heart rate and maintain focus under extreme stress. The judge was not a threat. He was a nuisance, an environmental stressor to be managed. David's eyes narrowed and he began to notice other details. When Thorne had shifted his weight, his jacket had pulled tight against his forearm, revealing the faint, faded outline of a tattoo just above his wrist. It was blurred with age and sun, but David could just make out the shape, an eagle clutching an anchor, a trident, and a pistol. The special warfare insignia, a seal trident. David's heart hammered against his ribs. It was possible, of course, that the tattoo was as fake as the medals the judge claimed they were. But then his eyes fell on the man's watch. It was a rugged, nonsense timepiece on a worn nylon strap. It wasn't a Rolex or a fancy brand. David leaned forward, squinting. He recognized the model. It was a Bremont, a specific limited edition model issued exclusively to members of a certain Naval Special Warfare Development Group. After completing their grueling selection process, you couldn't buy it. You had to earn it. The pieces clicked into place with an audible snap in David's mind. The posture, the breathing, the tattoo. The watch. This wasn't a man impersonating a hero. This was a hero trying to be an ordinary man and failing. I am going to give you one last chance to come clean. Mr. Thorne, Judge Finch boomed, clearly enjoying the spectacle he was creating. Tell this court, for the record, your unit. Tell us where you served. Tell us how a man of your apparent station came to be awarded the second highest decoration for valor this nation can bestow. If you can do that, I might be lenient. But if you continue this silent charade, I will hold you in contempt and personally ask the U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law for impersonating a federal officer. The threat was real. The air in the room grew heavy. The bailiff shifted his weight, his hand moving instinctively closer to his sidearm. All eyes were on Michael Thorne. He took a slow breath, the kind a man takes before diving into icy water. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, devoid of emotion, yet it carried to every corner of the room. Naval Special Warfare, Your Honor. The answer was technically correct, but intentionally vague. It was the answer of a man who was used to classifying his entire existence. It told the judge nothing, and that was the point. For Judge Finch, it was the final straw. That's it? That's all you have? That's an insult to my intelligence and to this court? As the judge's voice echoed, the sharp percussive sound of his banging gavel seemed to fracture the air. For Thorne, the sound wasn't a gavel. It was the dry crack of a Dragunov sniper rifle echoing through a high mountain pass. The judge's black robes became the suffocating darkness of a moonless Afghan night. He wasn't in a courtroom in Ohio. He was back there on the ridge, the icy wind tearing at his face, the metallic taste of fear and adrenaline in his mouth. He could feel the weight of his brother, Petty Officer Danny Rios, slung over his shoulder, the warm stickiness of blood soaking through his own gear. Danny was unconscious, his leg a mangled ruin. They were the only two left, cut off with enemy forces closing in. The citation for his Navy Cross read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." It didn't mention the 18 hours he spent holding off an enemy platoon by himself, the burning in his lungs, the promises he whispered to an unconscious Danny to keep himself sane. It didn't mention the feeling of the rescue helicopter's rotor wash. a deliverance so profound it felt like the hand of God. He had carried his friend for 3 mi, over broken terrain under constant fire to a defensible position. He had done it in silence, fueled by a promise. He was silent now for the same reason. The courageous honor wasn't in the talking, it was in the doing. David Chun felt a surge of protective fury. He knew what that vague answer meant. It meant that the man's real unit was classified. It meant his operations were black. It meant he was forbidden from talking about it. And even if he weren't, he wouldn't. The men who did the things that earned medals, like the Navy Cross, didn't brag about them in traffic court. They buried them deep, hoping the memories would stay buried with them. The judge was poking a bear, a sleeping grizzly with wounds he couldn't possibly imagine. David felt a professional and moral duty to act. He couldn't just sit here and watch this travesty of justice unfold. He started to rise, to object, to say something, anything, to stop the judge from making a mistake that would dishonor them all. He was a lawyer, an officer of the court, but he was a Marine first, and the idea of a civilian in a robe crucifying a man like Thorne was anathema to him. But before he could find his voice, Judge Finch made his final fatal error. "I have had enough of this," he declared, his face purple with rage. "This man is a liar and a fraud. He mocks this court, and he mocks the uniform. Bailiff, take Mr. Thorne into custody for contempt. I am also issuing a formal request to the federal prosecutor to investigate him for a violation of the Stolen Valor Act. Let's see how you enjoy federal prison." Mr. Thorne, the bailiff, a heavy-set man with a reluctant expression, began to move around the table. Sarah, the public defender, put a restraining hand on Thorne's arm, whispering frantic apologies. Thorne didn't move. He just watched the bailiff approach, his expression unreadable. And then, at that precise moment, the great double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a heavy, resonant thud that silenced every whisper and rustle in the room. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright light of the hallway, was a figure of immense and immediate authority. He was tall and ramrod straight, his uniform a pristine navy dress white, adorned with more ribbons than anyone in the room had ever seen outside of a museum. On his shoulders, 4 silver stars glittered, catching the light. The man was an admiral, a 4-star admiral. He strode into the courtroom, his polished shoes clicking with sharp rhythmic authority on the linoleum floor. The bailiff froze mid-step, his hand hovering uncertainly near Thorne's elbow. The prosecutor's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of disbelief. Judge Finch, who had been leaning forward in triumph, slowly sank back into his chair, his face paling. The admiral ignored them all. His eyes, a piercing blue that mirrored the man at the defendant's table, were locked on Michael Thorne. He walked the length of the aisle, his presence sucking all the air and arrogance out of the room. Replacing it with an atmosphere of profound gravity, he stopped directly in front of Thorne, and the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The admiral's gaze was intense, a mixture of pride, sorrow, and unyielding strength. And then, in a movement so crisp it seemed to cut the air, he brought his right hand up to his brow, his fingers perfectly aligned, and rendered a slow, formal salute. It was not the casual salute between colleagues. It was the salute of a senior officer to a recipient of the Medal of Honor or the Navy Cross, a gesture of supreme respect that transcended rank. He held the salute, his arm rigid, his gaze unwavering, directed at the quiet, tired man in the faded canvas jacket. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a ringing, deafening void. The image was so powerfully incongruous, so utterly subversive to the established order of the room, that no one knew how to react. A 4-star admiral saluting a man being held in contempt for unpaid parking tickets. It was impossible. Judge Finch looked as if he had been physically struck. He opened and closed his mouth, but no sound came out. The admiral, still holding his salute, finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried the effortless command of a man used to being obeyed by fleets. He did not address the judge. He addressed the court, the record, and history itself. For the record, the admiral began, his voice a low, powerful rumble. This man whom this court has seen fit to humiliate is Master Chief Petty Officer Michael Thorne, United States Navy, retired. He paused, letting the rank and title sink in. Master Chief, the highest enlisted rank, a legend in the community. He is without question one of the most decorated warriors to ever serve in naval special warfare. He lowered his salute slowly and placed a hand on Michael Thorne's shoulder. Thorne, who had been a statue of stoicism, finally blinked, a flicker of deep emotion passing through his exhausted eyes. The admiral turned his gaze, now as cold and unforgiving as the North Atlantic, directly onto Judge Finch. "Your Honor," he said, the title dripping with ice, "you question the authenticity of his medals. Allow me to authenticate them for you." He began a litany, a recitation of valor that fell like hammer blows in the silent room. The Navy Cross, awarded for actions above and beyond the call of duty during Operation Enduring Freedom, where he single-handedly saved his entire team from being overrun, sustaining multiple gunshot wounds in the process. His records are sealed, but I assure you, the reality was far more heroic than the citation suggests. He pointed to another ribbon. 5 bronze stars, all with the V for Valor device. One for a hostage rescue in the Horn of Africa, another for a direct action mission in Iraq. The others I am not at liberty to discuss in an open court, he continued, his voice resonating with righteous fury. 3 purple hearts for wounds received in combat, wounds this court cannot see, but which he carries every single day. The Presidential Unit Citation, the Joint Meritorious Combat Award. This man has spent more time defending this country in combat than you have spent on that bench, judging men you know nothing about. The admiral took a step closer to the bench, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He is quiet because the things he has seen would steal your voice. He is unassuming because the men he served with, the men who never came home, were the real heroes in his eyes. He wears that jacket because he gave his youth, his health, and his peace of mind to this nation. And he asks for nothing in return. His medals are not fake. They were paid for in blood, in silence, and with a level of sacrifice that you, sir, in your comfortable life, cannot possibly comprehend. He is not a disgrace to the uniform. He is the standard by which it is measured. And this court has committed a grave injustice today, not just to him, but to every quiet professional who serves in the shadow, so that you may sit in the light. The admiral's words echoed in the stunned silence. Judge Finch was a ruin. The color had drained from his face, leaving a pasty gray mask of humiliation. His arrogance, once a towering edifice, had been leveled, reduced to rubble by the truth. He looked at Michael Thorne, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a vagrant or a liar, but as the warrior the admiral described. The shame was a physical thing, pressing down on him, stealing his breath. From the gallery, a single person began to clap. It was a tentative, hesitant sound. Then another joined, and soon the entire courtroom, save for the judge and the prosecutor, was filled with a rising tide of applause. It wasn't for the admiral's theatricality. It was for the quiet man who had endured the abuse with such profound dignity. The admiral turned his back on the judge, a final dismissive gesture. He looked at Thorne, and his expression softened. The 4-star admiral was gone, and in his place was a man looking at someone he loved. "The charges are dismissed, of course," the judge stammered, his voice a weak croak, "with the court's deepest apologies." But no one was listening. The admiral squeezed Thorne's shoulder. "Let's go home, Mike," he said softly. The 2 men turned and walked toward the doors, the admiral's arm now resting on Thorne's back. As they passed the gallery, David Chun rose to his feet. He wasn't a lawyer anymore. He wasn't a civilian. He was a Marine. He stood at attention as Thorne passed. Their eyes met for a brief second. David gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of profound shared understanding. From one warrior to another, Thorne, his face still a mask of weary control, returned the nod. It was a small gesture, but it was the only vindication that truly mattered. The recognition of a brother. The courtroom doors closed behind them, leaving behind a shattered judge, a chastened prosecutor, and a room full of people who had just been given a powerful lesson on the nature of heroism, humility, and the vast silent debts they owed to the quiet men who walk among them, carrying the weight of a grateful nation on their unassuming shoulders. His usual confidence evaporating like morning dew. No mistake. We have documented evidence of discriminatory hiring practices, hostile work environment violations, and conspiracy to deny equal employment opportunities. Agent Rodriguez's voice carried across the suddenly quiet office. You have the right to legal representation. Brad, who had been laughing at Camila's text message an hour earlier, was now sliding his chair away from Derek like he had a contagious disease. By 2 p.m., the Chicago Tribune article was live. Sterling and Associates inside the Old Boys network that systematically excluded minorities. The article included screenshots of the WhatsApp group, Derek's LinkedIn manifesto, and recorded testimonies from 3 former Sterling employees who had been documenting discrimination for months. Derek's phone started buzzing incessantly. First, his mother, Derek, what is this article saying about you? Then his ex-girlfriend, are you seriously this racist? Then his college roommate, bro, you're trending on Twitter, and it's not good. At 3:15 p.m., Derek was called into the CEO's office where Mr. Sterling himself, a man who had built his reputation on progressive business practices, sat behind his desk looking like he wanted to crawl into a hole. Derek, Mr. Sterling's voice was ice cold, effective immediately. You're terminated. Security will escort you out. Our legal team will be in touch regarding the damage your actions have caused this firm. But sir, I can explain. Explain what? That you've single-handedly destroyed 30 years of reputation building. That your documented racism has cost us 12 major clients in 4 hours. That the IRS is now auditing our diversity hiring claims because of your group's activities. Mr. Sterling stood up, his face flushed with anger. Get out now. The walk of shame through the trading floor was brutal. Former colleagues who had been slapping his back that morning now avoided eye contact. The security guard, ironically, a black man Derek had never bothered to acknowledge, professionally escorted him to the elevators. As the elevator doors closed, Derek's phone buzzed one final time. Another message from Kama. By the way, I'm Dr. Camilla Williams, Harvard, PhD in psychology, specializing in institutional discrimination. My research on Sterling and Associates will be published next month. Thank you for being such a perfect case study. Derek's hands shook as he stared at the message. He frantically Googled Dr. Camilla Williams, Harvard, and felt his stomach drop as page after page of academic achievements, published papers, and speaking engagements filled his screen. TED Talks about unconscious bias. Congressional testimony on workplace discrimination. Award-winning research that had changed policy at Fortune 500 companies. The woman he had dismissed as just another quote hire was one of the most respected experts in the country on exactly the kind of behavior he and his colleagues had been exhibiting. By 6 p.m., Derek's LinkedIn profile had been flooded with comments calling him out. His Instagram posts about maintaining standards were being shared with captions like this. His dating profiles had been screenshot and circulated with warnings to women about his character. Rebecca Carter called Camila at 7:30 p.m. with an update that made both women smile. Sterling and Associates just offered a 7-figure settlement to avoid trial. They're also implementing mandatory bias training, diversifying their entire leadership team, and establishing a $2 million fund for minority scholarship programs. But the most beautiful part came the next morning when Derek, unemployed and unemployable in the Chicago finance scene, read the final article in the Tribune. Local restaurant becomes symbol of hope. How one woman's rejection led to industry-wide reform. The article featured a photo of Camila at the same restaurant where Derek had humiliated her. But this time she was surrounded by the Sterling and Associates Diversity Task Force, announcing new hiring initiatives that would create opportunities for hundreds of qualified candidates who had previously been excluded. And there in the background of the photo was little Annie holding her father's hand, both of them smiling at Kama like she was exactly the family they had been searching for. What started as Derek's casual cruelty had become Camila's catalyst for systematic change. And the most devastating irony, Derek's own arrogance had provided every piece of evidence needed to destroy not just his career, but the entire culture of discrimination that had protected him for so long. As Derek sat in his empty apartment, scrolling through job listings that would never call him back, one question haunted him. How had a woman he thought was beneath his notice orchestrated his complete, professional destruction without him suspecting a thing? The answer was simple but devastating. He had confused education with intelligence, position with power, and privilege with protection. And that fatal miscalculation had cost him everything he thought made him untouchable. 6 months later, Camila stood in the same restaurant where her nightmare had become her greatest victory. But this time, she wasn't alone. "Can I have the mac and cheese with extra cheese?" Annie asked the waiter, swinging her legs from the booster seat. She wore a bright yellow dress and had insisted on bringing her stuffed bear to celebrate. Dr. Marcus Thompson, who now insisted she call him Marcus, smiled as he helped Annie arrange her napkin. "What do you say, sweetheart?" "Please and thank you." Annie beamed, then turned to Camila. "Mommy, did you really make all those mean people at Daddy's work change their rules?" Camila's heart still fluttered every time Annie called her mommy. The adoption papers had been finalized just last week, making official what had felt true from that first night. "Sometimes, sweetheart, when people do wrong things, we have to help them learn to do better." Marcus squeezed Kama's hand under the table. Their relationship had grown from professional respect to deep love, as naturally as seasons change. He understood her mission, supported her work, and had shown Annie that families could grow in beautiful, unexpected ways. The Sterling case became a landmark, Marcus said, reviewing the tablet that showed the latest compliance reports. They've hired 47% minority staff in leadership positions. Real change, not token gestures. Camila nodded, but her greatest satisfaction wasn't in the numbers. It was watching Annie color pictures of their new family, listening to Marcus laugh, feeling the peace that came from turning pain into purpose. Derek's life, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale whispered through Chicago's financial circles. Unemployed for 6 months, he burned through his savings and moved back in with his parents. His LinkedIn profile remained a graveyard of unanswered applications. Every Google search of his name led to articles about systematic discrimination and corporate accountability. Rebecca Carter had called that morning with news that made Camila smile. 3 more companies have reached out wanting diversity audits. Derek's spectacular downfall is changing entire industries. But the most powerful change was sitting right here at this table. Annie had asked for a family, and somehow through rejection and revelation, through justice and healing, she had found exactly that. "Daddy, tell Mommy about the surprise," Annie whispered loudly, bouncing in her seat. Marcus grinned. "Annie wants to know if you'd like to help her plant a garden behind our house. She says flowers grow better when families plant them together." Camila looked around the table at her chosen family, the brilliant psychologist who had opened his heart again. The incredible little girl who saw love where adults saw complications and felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. A year ago, she had sat at a similar table, rejected and dismissed by a man who couldn't see her worth. Tonight she was surrounded by people who chose her every single day. Derek Morrison had tried to diminish her value, but instead had catalyzed the creation of something beautiful. Systematic change, professional triumph, and most importantly, a family built on choice, respect, and love. The best revenge truly wasn't destroying your enemies. It was building a life so fulfilling that their cruelty became irrelevant. As Annie chatted about flower varieties and Marcus discussed weekend plans, Camila realized that sometimes the universe responds to hatred by sending exactly the love you didn't know you needed. What started as one man's prejudice had become a woman's purpose, a family's foundation, and an industry's awakening. And if this story of transformation and second chances has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more proof that love, justice, and family can bloom in the most unexpected cases. Asterisk.